So hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening to people all around the world. I see a lot of different names. Some of them are familiar, some of them are new. Welcome, everyone. We're glad to see you all here. Today, we have yet again, a special conversation with our friend, Petter Amlie, who is if there's such a thing as bubble influencer, that's Petter right here. So not only he's super useful and a pioneer in Bubble and a lot of different dimensions of Bubble's depth and a super, let's say, I would say that Petter is the organizer of the common sense community knowledge and his own expertise about how to do or not to do things on Bubble. He's an author of a book about Bubble scaling, performance, and best practices in both building your application from the ground up and also getting it to the next level. And when the topic for today's conversation appeared in our minds, we definitely thought about Petter from the get-go. It's an interesting topic. It's pretty old in Bubble terms. People have been talking about this for some time. However, there hasn't been a lot of, let's say, organized expertise or general advice about this. So today's conversation with Petter is going to be about trying to elaborate on that a little bit and address the most pressing issues that Petter has faced in his practice, both as a builder and also as the member of the community. Let's see if he has any nuggets of wisdom that he has also included into his materials and books. And definitely there's a lot of questions that we have collected from you guys about both native build wrappers, Air native product that Zeroqode has recently launched, and pretty much anything around it. Like there will be general questions like, why would you need a native applications anyways, which is more of a business question, I guess, which we'll happily address. And there are going to be some more intricate questions such as, how does this thing work, or what are the limits and stuff like that. So this is the plan for today. So Petter, welcome. How does that sound? Did I miss anything important that was on your agenda? And how are you feeling today?
Feeling pretty good. I was just telling you, I'm a bit jet lagged. I just came from Dubai a few hours ago. I'm in Norway right now, and in Norway, it's cold and it's dark, and we do like this. I've lit the candle. So we're going to have a really cozy time here.
Very intimate conversation, yeah.
Sorry?
Very intimate.
Very intimate, yes. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. It's a very kind introduction, of course. I look very much forward to this. And as you say, I've kind of made it a mission or something that I want to work with to try to establish best practices on different fields in Bubble. And I think it makes sense to think about them in terms of, well, I have a book on performance, I have an upcoming book on security, and now we're going to talk a bit about mobile design. And this is not something where I've really structured my thoughts yet. You know, when you write a book, you tend to take a lot of unstructured thoughts and you just compress them into something that has to be at least a little bit structured. And I haven't done this for mobile app design. So I think it's going to be more of a conversational style today, and not really a presentation, right? And we have a lot of questions I can see already. So yeah, look very much forward to this.
Definitely. So yeah, exactly. Thank you, Petter. That's exactly my take on this conversation today as well. Basically, we have a lot of diverse experience in Bubble. Some of it does include the builds and wraps of native applications. A lot of it doesn't, and there has been a lot of considerations along the way in our practice for our own products as well, until we decided to actually build the Air native to kind of streamline the process. We've tried quite a few solutions there. We're happy to share our experience today. I'm sure you have something along those lines which you will be happy to share too. So yeah, definitely not a strict reference point, much more of a conversation about just sharing your experience so far and trying to get the best out of it.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get started. First of all, just kind of to for the people who have joined us recently and who may not know what I'm talking about when I'm saying Air native. The Air native is actually a Zeroqode product, which is a solution to wrap your Bubble application into a native app / container. What does that mean? We're going to be talking about that a lot today, but essentially for the founder, for the user of the application, that means you can publish your application to app stores, both Google Play and Apple App Store. That's the ultimate goal. Of course, that's not the point of it. The point of it is to bring more value to your users. And it's going to be quite a few questions about, okay, why would you want to do that anyways? Kind of like adding on your plate of a lot of things that you have to juggle and then keep those balls in the air when you're building your bubble application. But for a lot of people, this actually has a lot of value and has a lot of sense for their specific niche and in general for starting their applications on Bubble. So this is why Zeroqode, after trying quite a few solutions that we have both developed ourselves, reused the available builds on the market, we have kind of combined our experience over the last few years that we have collected that and mostly a lot of mistakes that we made and avoided all of these and built our own product that we're currently promoting and letting people try out and see for themselves. Basically, to put it very simply, it's a product that will help to wrap your Bubble application and publish it to app stores. So, but let's get to the very beginning. So, Peter, what's the most common reason in your experience why people in general have a need for wrapping their Bubble application, or let's say their no-code application, and putting it to an app store? What's the primary driver in your experience?
I would say it's different kinds of drivers, really, because I think for a lot of companies and a lot of projects, there's kind of a gravitas just having the app in an app store, right? So it's installable. You want to have the icon on people's phones and stuff like that. So it's I think there's a long list of different reasons to do it. And there are, in some cases, when I talk to a client or I advise someone, there are plenty of reasons not to do it. Sometimes you get it. I'm not really sure you need your app to be in the app store. You can do it, but it's not necessarily the best thing to do. But yeah, I think if you're building an app that needs to be kind of top of mind for your clients, you want your clients to access it frequently. Say you have some kind of social media app. Social media lives on frequent usage, right? So if people don't access Facebook every day, Facebook dies. And say, TikTok, if you're building a new TikTok, you probably want to be on people's phones so they can just start your app with a click. Those are very good reasons, right? But in many cases, a responsive page will be just as good or better, depending on what it is that you do.
Totally. Yeah, I second you here. And one of the other, yeah, you're right. The number one reason is just, I want this to be on the App Store because I believe that people are going to just jump on it as soon as they see it on the App Store, which is in most of the cases incorrect. So if that's your primary reason for wrapping your application and putting it on the App Store, that's probably a wrong one to get started with. The good reasons to get started with are the ones that Peter has outlined. Like if you want the improved ease of access, if you don't want people to type in your URL each and every time they want to use your application, then yes, publishing it to an app store is a good motive. Another good motive, and probably one of the key aspects that we have faced from a technical standpoint, are some of the native features which may not be working exactly like that on the responsive web applications, regardless of how good they look. The simplest one is the push notifications. So that's, I guess, the primary driver for a lot of people, and that's our best selling or most popular addition to the standard license, which is being able to reach your users whenever there's something important happening on the platform. Let's say there's something that needs their attention, they have a message, they have a sale, they have whatever notification that they need to attend to. The general web solution is an email or text in some cases, but that anyways requires an additional integration. But native push is a much more advanced and, let's say, natural and non-intrusive, if you will, solution to kind of nudge people a little bit about getting them back in their application. That's number one reason. And number two is continuing the lines of, I guess, native features is, in general, native features such as accessing your contacts, having a more seamless integration with your phone camera, like recording the audio and things like that. So they are all achievable actually through plugins and in general through standard, let's say, web app functionality, but they're not as seamless as some people wouldn't want. So that's another driver. There's a lot of them, and they're pretty niche. So they're not like necessary for all the applications. They're not necessary for most applications, I guess. But for the ones which they are key, let's say your application is, I don't know, a scanner or a barcode reader or something like that, then your application is going to be working much more seamless if you will be reusing, not going, let's say, through a standard web app connection to a camera, but a more inbuilt native kind of thing. Same with your contacts, same with, along those lines. That's probably the number 2 reason. And in our experience, which are, pushing people to rightfully wrap their applications and put them on app stores.
I just want to add there to that, the technical aspects of this, where you basically, if you want to connect your app to the device on which it is on, yes, you're going to need to do it in this way. And this has a little bit to do with users' expectations too. What kind of category is your app? So for some kinds of apps, if I want to read the local newspapers, I won't be looking for an app. I'll just access the website, whichever it is, to read it there. But if I am to use something like a social media or something like some kind of business app that relies on the phone's camera, for example, I will be looking for it in the App Store, right? So it's a little bit what you communicate to your users as well. If they expect it to be there, it probably should, right? So, and this is often connected to, as you say, device features that are only available with an app that's built this way.
Yeah, that's kind of the examples in our experience of legitimate reasons for people to actually push for going, say, native, or for some of them even native first. So okay, what are the, let's say, the biggest caveats in your experience of publishing, or in general building an application? What's, let's say, the best approach in your experience, or maybe a few of them, and what's the worst approach, both technically and business wise, to, okay, let's have an app?
Yeah. So I would start out by saying, the first thing you need to do is really to make a decision. Do you want to be in the App Store? And if you do, why do you do that? So in many cases, there are very good reasons to do that. As I say, sometimes the users will expect you to be there. That's where they will be looking for you. And in that way, the App Store can be a very good marketing platform, right? If they search for something and they find you get a lot of installs that way. The technical side also is, if you want to connect your device in some way, you should probably be in the App Store. And other ideas, in some cases, it makes sense to build a product that's built responsibly, where you don't really need to have that App Store presence, and it makes more sense to do it that way. And personally, when I look at something like ClickUp, which is an app that a lot of Bubble users use, I've used it a lot for project management. I think most people will find that the app version of ClickUp is a pretty scaled down version of the full desktop application, right? And this is often the case, but I would argue that it has still got a lot of value to have ClickUp there, because you're using it in a different way on your phone than you're using it on desktop. So for example, I use ClickUp for my daily tasks as well. And in a lot of cases, this is just something I see. I need to snap something with my camera. I take it there, I share it via the mobile sharing screen, and I create a task in ClickUp very quickly. And I don't really need all the features of that desktop can offer, but I need that one. And it's a lot easier to do it with my phone than it is to do via desktop. So it's not given always that your mobile app and your desktop app, if you have both, that they're exactly the same. They can be two different products. Can we return to the question? I'm not sure I really answered.
That's a great example of the answer I think that people would appreciate. Basically, what are the caveats? And if I can basically summarize what you said, is don't try to stuff everything that you have in your desktop, or even if your web version of the application, to your wrapped/native version of the application, because first of all, it's going to be very difficult. And maybe even before that, people are probably not going to use all of these. They don't really need all of these features, because most of them, if not all of them, are making a lot more sense to be used on a bigger screen when you have access to more information, when you're not like on the move. But some of those features, which are usually a minority of the features that your platform offers, are actually best used on an app. And you gave a great example of that. So that's basically something to keep in mind when you're trying to say, okay, I have an application, so I want to have a native version of it as well. So how do I scale it down? So that doesn't necessarily has to be one-to-one. So, and then sometimes it's a big mistake to try to do everything exactly as it is available on your web application, on your native application. So what are the other caveats that people better keep in mind? Let's say that we have already stumbled on.
Yeah, and I think it's an important point that on mobile, it is more difficult to design for mobile. I'm sure you'll agree. Most people would agree with this. You have a lot less screen real estate, right? So there's a lot less room on the screen. And also your users' expectations, that changed a lot when they switched over to a mobile app. Like the ClickUp example, I don't expect really to be able to do everything in that app. I'm fine with just having this kind of simplified version of it. There are some features that I missed that I wish was there. And I'm sure maybe they will be there in the future, but if they try to replicate the full set of features that in the desktop app, it would be completely overwhelming, right? It would be, how many clicks do you need to do something compared to what you could do with a mouse on the screen? So I think it's important to have an approach that, a lot of people, if you go back to who are building these apps, right? They want to build something on their own, but they find Bubble and they find out that, okay, I'm not a developer, but I can still make an app, which is fantastic.
Right.
But then a lot of people, they suddenly realize at some point that, okay, that means I have to be a database designer, I have to be a designer, I have to learn about user interfaces, all of these things. And it's kind of overwhelming, but it's also a lot of fun. You're going to make a bunch of mistakes and you're going to learn from them and you're going to build something great gradually, right? And one of the things I would be pretty clear to people is that I think there's more room for error in a desktop application. You can play around and people will accept that, okay, this could have been solved in a different way from a user interface perspective. Whereas mobile apps, you have to be more careful in, really pinpointing what exactly are your users going to do with this application and how can I get there with as few clicks as possible, basically. And there's a lot going on. I think when people start designing for mobile, if they're not used to it, that's going to surprise them. And I've made some really silly mistakes myself, like let's say a key feature of my app relies on something happening when I hover an element with the mouse, right? I deploy this, I try it on my mobile, wow, that looks great. And then I realized that, you never hover anything on mobile, right? It can't tell if you're hovering your thumb over it. So you need to think differently. And when you click an input field, a keyboard is going to pop up and steal 50% of your screen, right? How does that affect your design and everything? Suddenly you can't really see clearly, something is pushed off the screen. Maybe you have some instructions that you can no longer see. All of these are things that it takes some experience before you can really design that up front without having to do a lot of testing and get user feedback. So I think the planning of a mobile app is very different from a desktop app in that way. So, for myself, if I plan out a big project, sometimes we'll use Figma to design something if we're really into some kind of custom design. On mobile, for example, I would say it's more important on mobile because you don't really know how your app is going to look before you actually see it on the screen, and you can see how the button is sized. How will your thumb react to this, and how will it react to your thumb? You really need to see it in front of you. So I always push that people plan out their apps pretty carefully and not just try everything as you develop it. But on mobile, I would say it's even more even more important, because a clunky user interface on mobile, people are going to spend 5 seconds in your app and going to close it. You don't get a second chance. Whereas on desktop, people are a bit more forgiving.
Totally. Yeah. It reminds me of a famous quote by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, when he said that perfection is not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to remove. So when you're like at your absolute optimum minimum level of functionality, and that's pretty much applicable to all the applications, I think. But mobiles, that's kind of like very, very evidently so. So just keep in mind that it's best to have less is basically more. than to have like more stuff that that people might use at some point, and might hope that that will kind of increase the value for them. So definitely we're on the same page here. So there were a couple of great questions from the audience here that were kind of along the same line that we're talking about, like kind of planning your applications and building in. And a good one to start with, kind of a basic one for where a lot of people ask themselves, is a question. So I'm just quoting it. So if I already have a web application and I want to launch a mobile app, do I need to duplicate all my existing pages in a single page app? Is it possible to keep the same pages? So Peter, what's your take on that?
My take on that is if you want to replicate the feeling of a native application, you want to keep most of it on the same page. And the reason for that, obviously, is that a native application would never have to load a page. You know, you click something, you expect to see the result instantly.
Mm-hmm.
And by hiding and showing groups instead of jumping from page to page, you're going to see the same thing in native application. And this I think it will be pretty clear that your app is not native if you keep skipping between pages. That being said, you know, one of the principles that I lay out in my book is that the more things you place on your page, both workflows and elements, the heavier the page becomes and the longer it takes to load, and the more it will jump around as it loads and all of that. So in a mobile application, you will have some processes that you only run maybe once and maybe a few more times. Like if you have a sign-up form, for example, your users are probably going to go through it just once and then never see it again. In that case, maybe you can live with sending it to a different page that's the actual app when that part of the process is done, so that you don't have to load that part of the page every time in the future unnecessarily, because you're never going to see it again. But yes, a mobile app will in most cases definitely be a single page application. So
yeah, my experience is very similar to Peter's, because it depends, like a lot of things in Bubble and let's say in development overall, because in general you would want to plan it all from the get-go and have a separate page that would just have the mobile features on it that would be perfectly designed and working, etc., etc. But yeah, in reality, that doesn't always happen, of course. So if you're at the point where you have a perfectly working web application and all of a sudden you decided to pivot, let's say, and decided to create a native app, then I guess the best approach here would be to kind of really carefully consider why do you want to do that and which features actually do need to be in your native wrapper. So in your native wrap application. So if that's like one or two features, then probably there's going to be not a lot of effort to actually recreate that one pager specifically designed for an optimal user experience. If that's a lot of features that you're after, and let's say they take a lot of work to redo, then yeah, probably I would reconsider in general the intention to create a mobile application that would cover everything, because that's probably wrong, because if people equally require your application on desktop and native and the whole wholesomeness of your application, then probably you have your user data wrong, because that's impossible. I think that there's not a lot of apps out there, maybe besides social media, that that need all the features both on desktop and on your mobile or smartphone exactly the same. Probably there are none. Even the social media ones, you're using them very differently. When you're in desktop, you're kind of more in a reading mode. You're more thorough. You like reply to comments more, maybe you browse to different pages, etc. While you're on your smartphone, you're kind of more focused and you're more like doing pretty much one in the single action, like scroll, like, scroll, like. So even then the experience is different. So that's kind of to straighten the point that Peter made, that it has to be like a separate plan for the whole thing. And the earlier you start planning it, the better. less rework from you.
Yeah, and sometimes it helps to think, which tasks or which features that my app has will be easier to solve on mobile. That could help you out. So going back to my example with ClickUp, I find it easier to add a specific kind of task on mobile than I find doing it on desktop. Even to the point of I could be looking at ClickUp on my desktop computer and still pick up my phone and do something with it, sharing a link or taking a picture or something like that, because it's easier to do with your phone. So, when you design a app for desktop, you're often thinking of the app as a full feature set. You're building a CRM, so you think of all the features that a specific kind of CRM would need. Mm-hmm. Whereas on mobile, I would think more, okay, what are the, maybe even just top 5 features that I need here? Why would people want a mobile version of my app? Okay, they would probably want to be able to quickly add tasks or add photos to a task, something like that. Or if you're in a meeting and you communicate with your team, you're going to need quick access to, as you say, like comments, reply to comments. Those are the things that we use mobile for, when we're on the go. So yeah, think about that. Don't think of it as a full version of the app. Think about it as a stripped down, top 5 features or top 10, whatever suits your app, that I'm going to need to have in my pocket, basically.
Definitely, that's the right mode of thinking, and as Peter suggested, the earlier you get into it, the better, because probably the most trouble that you're going to add for yourself is, let's say, if you're going to be wrapping everything you have perfectly working and maybe even perfectly responsive into a native application and then try to optimize the user experience. That's probably going to be a terrible one. So don't do that. I mean, I did that quite a few times, and that was not a good thing to do. So don't repeat our mistake.
I just want to add one comment here too, because one thing that people keep telling me is that they have always heard the advice that you should build responsively, right? You should build responsive pages. And this is important for SEO, for example. Google have been quite clear. It's one of the few things that they do confirm about SEO. It's that they prefer responsive sites. So I think it's pretty important here that we point out the difference between an app and a website, right? So for a website, I don't think it makes much sense to create a separate mobile page anymore. It's questionable whether how this affects your SEO. I can't say exactly, but a responsive page seems to be preferred by Google. But if you're building a CRM or if you're building ClickUp or a social media, you don't care about SEO, right? So you want just a purely good mobile experience, and a responsive page does not necessarily let you do that. So, I've seen some apps where you have a full desktop version, where you can have the desktop version in one group and then you have the mobile version in a group below that, and you just collapse and show the ones depending on the width of the screen. Mm-hmm. And you're going to be loading a lot of information that's never going to be used, because people never resize their screen down to mobile once it's loaded, right? So it makes no sense really to keep all that on the same page. That's not really responsive design. So keep it separate when we're talking about apps, but keep it responsive when we're talking about websites that have, especially if they're visible in the search engines.
Definitely. I guess something to complement that explanation which you just provided. There's a question from one of our listeners that is asking, what are the main differences between a wrapped application versus native application? I guess that might be a little confusing for people who are not, let's say, entirely familiar with the concept of wrapping. And we're juggling those terms: the web application, wrapped application, native application. So how would you distinguish that for a person just trying to understand all these 3 concepts?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing is to just throw all the technical terms out of the window and just say, when the kind of app that we're talking about is one where you are looking at a browser window with no edge. That's it, right? So you're still running the app in a browser just like any other bubble app, except that we're basically removing the URL tab and all your bookmark and all that. It's not showing. We're just showing the full website, full screen. So it's not a separate app. And when you set up your web wrapper to create this, you're not actually creating a special kind of app. You're just using the built-in browser on the device to show the web page, which looks like an app, right? So And people sometimes have their doubts, is this a good practice to do it like that? Isn't native better? And I wouldn't say native is better. There are different ways to do things. And there are many big players that use this method where they wrap a website. I think actually Uber do this, and the Uber app looks fantastic, right? And Spotify does this. And they're not built on Bubble, obviously, but they're built with code, but they're not built with native code. They're built with JavaScript and HTML and CSS.
Slack do that for some time as well.
Oh yeah, I've heard that. Slack also do that. So, and of course, because they use your software, which is in itself a native application, you can connect your Bubble app to native features like accessing the contacts, accessing the camera. So you get an extra kind of feature set built on top of your Bubble app, which they get access to through a plugin that you built, right? So this is it. Basically, you're still looking at a website. We're just removing the frame around it, and we're giving access to some extra features like accessing fingerprint readers and contacts and camera and all of that. I hope, was that a clear? Let us know in the comment if that was clear.
Yeah, let us know if that was clear. But let me add on top of what Peter explained. The other take on this is, so let's say there are three starting points. The extreme of non-native is a web application, right? Since we're very focused on Bubble development here primarily, then a Bubble application in its core is a web application, regardless of whether you're using on your smartphone, desktop, mobile, whatever. Behind the scenes, there's a web server that serves your pages and brings your logic. A native application is an application that is actually running on your phone, meaning that it sits on your phone, it's hosted on your phone, the actual packages and code that is being unpacked and launched are on your smartphone. So this is not what Bubble does. So Bubble at the moment is not able to actually kind of host itself on your phone. It's always hosted in the Bubble cloud. So what the wrapper does, it's kind of bridges the best of the both worlds. And as Peter has explained, if you need some of the features that would be generally available in the native applications, or if you need to access some of the functions of your smartphone or device, but you don't necessarily like how, let's say, a browser does that. Like a good example is like a photo or your contacts, or let's say the biometrics of a phone. So some applications, these days greatly benefit from that, like improved authentication, like simplified or in a very good security grade. So there's basically no way to do that in a pure native, web application, but you can do that in a native application. So you have a web based no-code application, a Bubble app, and if you need some of these features, maybe all these features, then the way to go is a native wrapper, which is actually like a bridge. There's even a term like that. Basically, it's a JavaScript bridge, which basically lets your web application communicate with the software on your phone, and vice versa. So lets the software on your phone communicate with your web server, which is a Bubble application. So if like to overly simplify this, of course, there's a lot more nuances and stuff, but that's the essence of it. So the web application purely runs in your browser, native application purely runs on your phone, and a wrapped application is a web application which, using the container, uses some of the features from your device, but actually it still continues to run in the backend as part of the web server. I hope I didn't complicate and confuse people beyond that. So let us know in the comments if that's making more sense now.
I think one thing we should add to this that we should have talked about maybe earlier when we talked about caveats of mobile apps and that. Bubble uses server-side rendering, which means it takes everything that you built on the page and it combines it with the contents of your database, and then it generates HTML and it sends that HTML to your browser, and then it renders. So of course, what this means is that your app is not available offline, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there are ways around this, but at some point you'll have to create so much custom code, it doesn't make sense to build it in Bubble anymore. So you should be aware of this before you make your decision. If you're planning to submit something in the App Store, as of now, unless you're prepared to do a lot of extra work, your app will not work if you're not online.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually one of the questions I believe that we keep getting. So, and there's two questions which sound different but point kind of to the same conclusions. First one is a wrapper or a wrapped application available offline? And the second is what are the, let's say, the no-goes and not to do use cases for a wrapper to be used for my web application to be posted to app stores. They don't have the same answer, but the answer is adjacent to one another. So to answer the first one, so as Peter said, the simple way to say it is, yes, your application won't be running as you expect it to run if you're offline, because in case of a bubble application, for the visuals to be served, for the functions to be triggered, for the data to be pulled and pushed, you need to be able to communicate with a remote server. In this case, Bubble Cloud. And if there's no connection, then you're not going to be able to do that, period. So your application is not going to work. However, we are in Zeroqode and Air Native, and I believe some of the other solutions are also partially offering that. There may be, let's say, somewhat a similar, or let's say, well, partial offline availability, and that is mostly for the content that you have already downloaded. So let's say you're on a static page and there are some videos or files or let's say audio files that you have downloaded. Let's say, so you will be able to run those files which you have already downloaded and cached. And in theory, the person doesn't browse somewhere else or doesn't trigger some sort of a workflow, which would then initiate a query to a remote web application, then he might even get a sense that your application is working offline. But that's kind of a compromise, I would say. And it probably doesn't cover most of the cases which people expect, like work fully offline and then synchronize when you get back online. Currently, that's not available. And yeah, so that's answering both of these questions. And that's probably the use case for the wrap applications where they do not shine just yet. So there's no way for you to kind of cache the whole server backend, which Peter mentioned, and make it seamless for your users when you're not offline. So, but the good news is, which I always kind of address whenever this argument comes up, that there's really not a lot of applications these days who are expected to be fully offline or even partially offline. It's almost all the applications on your phone have either the major part of their functionality expected to be always synced with the cloud and stuff, or at least some of it. The exceptions are probably some sort of to-do list applications or notes applications, maybe, I don't know, timers, but probably for anything, let's say like an application, like a startup or an app idea, I would say 90% of those will still be expected to be kind of synced up remotely with a centralized database to be available on multiple devices, to be interacting with multiple users and stuff, et cetera, et cetera. And I can remember very few applications that are expected to be working offline, like for let's say the top 3 of their features. So although it's, yeah, your bubble application, wrap or not, is not going to be working offline, good news is that it's probably not that valuable or that important to your users. So yeah, that's both good and bad news. Another good question that I saw, and I keep seeing in the comments, is progressive web applications, PWAs, which is a bit of a general term these days because people use that that acronym very freely, and some people mean different things when they're saying PWA. Peter, what's your experience with PWAs? Have you researched that question? Have people been asking you something about these, and what's your stance overall, and where that is involved in, let's say, native application game?
Yes, I agree that it's a bit of a fuzzy term, because if you build an app in Bubble and you make it installable through one of the app stores using a web wrapper, by most definitions, you have a PWA, right? This is what it is basically, and it has a lot of upsides compared to regular apps, that is going to be pretty lightweight because you're loading everything from the web and all that, and you have the upside of it being installable on the phone, and it's not something that you have to access in a browser. So to the user, a PWA will look and behave in many ways just like a regular application. So for the coming questions now, it would be useful if you're a little bit more specific about specific parts of a PWA or specific features that you want to ask about, because the definition is a little bit fuzzy. So what was the question about PWAs?
So there were a few. Let me find the ones that were the recent ones about PWAs. Yeah. I guess if I were to generalize a few of them that I saw is PWA a solution for any of the issues, let's say, that we have been outlining, or is PWA doing this any different from, let's say, a wrapped application? Basically, is PWA an answer that people are looking for when they decide to make a jump for making native applications out of their bubble application, like being downloadable and being working offline? So to which extent does PWA cover that ground?
Yeah, so I would say I would answer that kind of in the same way that we answered the wrapper question in the beginning, right, that a PWA will give you access to native features on the phone, even if it's not a native application. Mm-hmm. So those are, you have to look at what kind of features do you want to offer in your application. If they include your app being installed on a device with a shortcut on the desktop, yes, you're going to need a PWA. Mm-hmm. If you want to access native features like accessing the contacts, using the fingerprint reader, taking photos and uploading into your app, yeah, you're going to want to use a wrapper which will turn it into a PWA.
Right. So to add on that, my experience with PWAs is that there was a lot of promise in those maybe a couple of years back, and there still is. And I think what people are calling PWAs and the general term PWA, which was mostly, I think, promoted by Google and still is, looks like Android has as a, let's say, is looking more sympathetically on PWAs than Apple does at the moment. It was basically kind of meet in the middle for wrapping your application or building it natively and running it on purely in web, which is downloading some of the files that you might need for running an application offline if necessary, or just loading in it better in general and having that icon on your desktop. But do not load the whole thing because it's sitting very nicely there on the web server, and kind of like make it lightweight, make it fast, but also keep some of the best let's say, features of the native application. This is what PWA is. It's not a native application. It's not a wrapped application. It's something else. So currently people say PWA whenever it's anything in between. Like that doesn't necessarily, I mean, wrapped application is a PWA for some other people. Even some people are basically saving the shortcuts, the bookmarks to their responsive web pages on their phone, and they're calling that PWA. So none of these are actually PWAs in what Google was, let's say, planning for that term. So PWA is something actually different. So it's basically one of the variations of where web can meet native, and that did not actually take off just yet. But I think Google at some point had plans to make it possible to submit your PWAs to Google App Store. Maybe they even had that possibility. But the one of the things that kind of ruined those plans is Apple. Basically, Apple didn't look that sympathetically on PWAs, so they were not sure that this is basically something that they want to work with. So PWA didn't go very far from there since then. So yeah, that's my take on PWAs. All right, and it looks like we may have lost Peter. So let me address a couple more questions that I see in the chat before Peter hopefully gets back to us. Yeah. What are the best practices to use when building my bubble application in order to take advantage of Air Native? That's a great question. And we actually, I believe we started from that in the beginning. So Air Native is a great solution to wrap your application, and it does just that and extends the features of your application to utilize some of the native features of your phone. But it all has to be done, let's say, better in terms of planning it in advance. And just 1 second before I continue, let me allow Peter to talk to us. Peter, can you try that again?
There we are.
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Great. Yeah, that worked. So I was just trying to kind of recap the starting point of our conversation, because the question was, what are the best practices to use when building your Bubble application to take advantage of Air Native? And I think we pretty neatly summarized that in the very beginning. Air Native or not, if you're building an application, having in mind and having a plan to have some of it or all of it available natively in the form of a native app published to the app stores, you need to plan the design and functionality in advance, maybe even before you approach the whole the application as a whole, because as Peter's best take on that was, you're probably not going to need all of the features of your application on your mobile in a native app wrapped form. So think of what are the reasons why people would actually want that thing on the mobile to begin with, and focus on that, make them accessible, and make as little elements and little actions necessary for people to actually use your application. And that will be probably the best thing you can do to prepare for a Air Native build, or pretty much any other native wrapper. Peter, did I summarize that correctly? Or did I miss anything important?
No, I think you summarized it very good. And yeah, again, a mobile app should kind of be a short list of features that you want your users to have. And whether it's an installable or PWA app where you connect your features to the phone itself or to the tablet, you'll need to see, do I need that? Why do I need it? And in what way will it behave differently than your desktop application?
Yeah, that's a good one. The short list of your features that people will actually need on mobile. That's probably the best way to say it. All right. There has been a few other questions which have been repeated both before the session and during the session today. The question about the payments in the app. So people are worried that there has been like a lot of big items in the news over the last few years when Apple and Google actually was kind of bullying let's say the developers to cut them their share, and to share any basically transactions that people are paying for whenever they're using their applications. Like I think for Apple there was a 30% cut for basically any financial transaction going through the natively wrapped application. Sorry, not natively wrapped, native applications on their phone. And there was a lot of fuss. There has been like a lawsuit, and I don't know who won, but I know that the result of this whole buzz was that I think both Apple and Google do not make that mandatory any longer. So it's no longer a thing when you absolutely have to send all the transactions through Apple payment system or Google payment system. You can do that. In our case, probably Stripe is the most viable alternative. So people can legally do that. You don't have to share it with Apple. So that's no longer a problem for people thinking about monetizing their native application anymore. Peter, do you have anything more about this one? Because I believe it's pretty important for people trying to monetize their stuff.
Yeah, I think it brings up an important overall point that certainly has affected payments in the past, but it also affects other parts of your app. So you have to be prepared for, when you want to publish something in the app stores, that you're all of a sudden, you have to answer to a different set of rules, right? So as an example, if you are planning to set up some kind of news application where you share news stories, for example, you'll have to categorize as a news application in the different app stores. And because of all the discussions that have been around, fake news and all of this, both app stores have started to remove apps that they don't think that are conveying fake news or something like that, which you don't necessarily have exactly the same freedom building an app that you want to release in the app stores compared to what you can do on the web, right? So I hope you're not building something that conveys fake news. That was just an example, but you really have to check, okay, what kind of app am I creating and how does that affect me? Does this kind of category of app force me to use in-app payments, for example? I'm not entirely up to date about what categories there, but I think there's still some categorization where some categories are forced to use the in-app payments, which may steal up to 30% of your revenue. Whereas other categories, you're allowed to use Stripe or something like that. That may have changed since I last checked it, but you should be aware that the category of app that you're creating may be affected by some specific app rules in the app stores that you're not aware of until you try to publish and you get rejected or something like that.
Right. Actually, you bring up a great point that I believe people have asked a few times about this today already and previously as well. One of the biggest things to keep in mind when you decide to publish your app on an app store is, again, why do you need that? And how is going to be bringing more value to the end user than if you just kept it responsive and in your browser? Because if there's little difference or even, I know about the cases when there's no difference. Basically, people are thinking that, okay, I have this great responsive application. It's looking really nice on my phone. It's ready to be wrapped as it is, which is true. So I'm just going to post the same application, essentially working from within the wrapper to the App Store, and it's going to fly. Most probably, there has been some exceptions, but I'd say 90% of the cases, it's probably not going to fly because, and it's much more stricter in case of Apple. Basically, the question from Apple will be, why are you actually creating a native application of something that is available by your Safari browser? That's the exact way they're asking it. I mean, you may not be using Safari browser, but the point is that if you're actually able to access all the value, all the functions that the app delivers via the browser, and there's really no point in you wrapping that to a native application, then most probably Apple is going to reject that and say, okay, please, explain why do we need that another one of these apps in our app store? And they're probably going to be right, because if there's no point in having a native app, then just leave it on as web responsive. So what you need to do is you need to really think, again, coming back to that same question, which we keep on hammering on today, why do you need a native applications? What value do native applications add to your user experience? And make sure it's visible for people. And maybe the application in your native is going to be very different. Maybe your point is that the push notifications are a key element to your experience and you're not able to achieve that on the web front, which is a valid argument. So yeah, just keep that in mind, because I mean, again, it's not guaranteed. Apple can be pretty unpredictable sometimes. It doesn't necessarily it's not necessarily gonna happen to you, but if there's like really no difference or very little difference between web application and your native application, then step back and rethink again if you really need to do that, because you're going to be jumping through a lot of hoops and maybe even end up with basically Apple not letting your application to be published on an app store. That did happen a few times in our experience, so don't repeat our mistakes.
And it's I'd add that it's pretty complex sometimes. It's not always. Sometimes you have published a lot of apps, I'm sure, to the app stores. You're getting pretty experienced with this. Still, I'm guessing sometimes you reject it and you're like, oh, I had no idea this was not legal, right? Or legal. Right. Well, you're breaking some terms in the, and with something like fake news, which we talked about earlier, there could be scenarios where you are not conveying any fake news, but your users are. Your platform somehow turns into something that publishes stuff that is not accepted by the terms in the app stores. And 3 months in after your app is published, you suddenly lose access to the app stores because your users were actually breaking the terms, not you. So you are subjected to a whole different walled garden where you have to accept different terms than are in a regular web browser.
Totally. Yeah, that's a great point. And last one to kind of close the topic of publishing to app stores. Fake news is one thing, regulations are another thing, and then being not, let's say, authentic enough for App Store is a third thing. But I think that one of the biggest hurdles that people are facing is that at least Apple is the biggest pain in the ass. So just to be upfront, Google is much more liberal in terms of what they're allowing on their platform. So, and Apple is manually verifying your application whenever you're submitting at least for the first time. They're actually a person that is actually testing your application, clicking on the buttons, and essentially deciding whether that's a good addition to an application or not. So that's kind of an ultimate test to your user experience and then user friendliness and intuitiveness of your application, because Apple does a lot of stupid mistakes. Basically, it can be, for you, very evidently clear what you have to do in the application and what not to do in your application. But you will be amazed that Apple testers are actually clicking all over, completely missing the point, and a lot of your resubmissions are going to be because Apple has misunderstood the whole user experience that you had in mind for your application. So it's actually a good thing if you think about it, because if they can do it, then probably your users may stumble upon the same problem. So be prepared for that as well. So your application may be perfectly well done technically, no bugs, but people are just going to be missing the point, and you're going to be having to resubmit the thing again and again. So keep that in mind as well. There were a couple questions about, let's say, in general, a process of how does Air Native works and how does the web wrapping works. So Peter, if you allow me, I'll in a nutshell just explain of how people get started, and maybe you will also share like what was your experience with that, with the similar solutions and similar situations. So as I mentioned previously, we have been trying a few different approaches to the whole no code / bubble application wrapping. Over the course of the years, we have been finding some open source wrappers, working with freelancers to code stuff for us, and then trying to apply this to a bubble world. And as well as we have worked with very established players such as Go Native, which have a great solution, by the way. But I guess the only disadvantage of Go Native is their price tag and their overall, let's say, broad spectrum of things that they want to do for everyone, because Air Native is basically for any application, any web application. It doesn't necessarily have to be running on Bubble, which makes it great for covering more ground, which makes it less applicable for specifically Bubble use cases. So we kind of decided, having it understood the advantages and disadvantages of all of these approaches, we decided to build something that would be targeting specifically the Bubble applications, addressing the needs and the pains of Bubble users, and be affordable enough to be in the ballpark of what people expect to pay for wrapping your native application on Bubble. And we've streamlined the process as well, because there's a lot of hurdles. Basically, people do not understand that they have to provide all the different icon sizes, all the different names of their application descriptions. They have to create the accounts on both of the platforms, and they have to do all these little simple but numerous things for that thing to happen. And basically that's I guess one of the biggest pains that people face when they're trying to publish the apps on the App Store. So what Air Native does is that it streamlines all of that. There's a simple page which describes what you need to do. There's a list of inputs that you need to fill. And if you don't, you kind of get a nudge about that, saying, hey, here's what we're missing, here's what we need to proceed. And then there's a service that basically does all the legwork for you, the wrapping, the actual conversion, and the publishing, provided that you have handing over the accesses. Basically, it's a kind of a white glove service for everything that you need to publish your application on the App Store. There's an option for you to do all of that as well. It's not something that is forced. Basically, you just can pay for the license, get it built, and publish it yourself if you're experienced and know how to do it, or you're curious enough to do that. But there's also an option for basically the team to take care of that for you. So that's kind of the best of the both worlds. And we believe that Air Native is kind of in a sweet spot for everything specifically Bubble related. And for that, we have actually also released a plugin that is making it useful, easy, and helpful for you to actually bridge that web app functionality and the native features functionality, such as context, vibrations, push notifications, and such. So that's kind of in a nutshell what Air Native does for being easily accessible and understandable for people who have a no-code web application built. So and it's a result of a lot of pain that we have endured and we have unintentionally forced on our clients over the years, trying to make a better experience for them eventually. So Peter, what has been your experience with wrapping apps to native, if at all, and then what options have you been exploring yourself?
So when I started out, I can't actually remember the name of it, but I used some web wrapper that I bought early on when there was nothing built yet for Bubble. So I've been using BDK native as well, which is, I guess, a competitor to yours. And they have the same thing that you have, which I would say is a huge strength for Bubble developers, that the plugin that you mentioned that gives you direct access to the features on your phone. I would say you're doing yourself a pretty big service, especially if you don't have a lot of experience working with native applications, that you can connect those directly. And for many native applications, this is exactly the reason why you would do that, right? So you need access to the contacts or the uploading photos or whichever features you need from the native side. This is often the reason why you want to be in the app stores. So if you can build that in Bubble as any other feature, you know, just place it within a workflow, just like everything else. Yeah, it's very easy, right? It's the easiest way to build an app because you're used to doing it that way already. So I would say, yeah, it's a lot easier if you choose something like your solution, or sorry, something like BDK, which is where it's built specifically for Bubble. I would recommend doing that. It makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, it's a great point. And then some of the folks have highlighted here that they have already used, and let's say they published a solution to an app store using an alternative. There's a lot of different alternatives like web wrappers. And if you've done that and you're happy, then there's no reason for you to switch ships. Just keep it as it is. And I mean, you've gone through a lot already to get there, so no need to swap. But what Peter has pointed out is a great argument. Let's say you want to extend it and you want to add a few more features which are specifically going to utilize that native container which we're talking about today. Let's say you want to add the vibrations on your phone, or you want to add like a biometrics authentication, or you want to add something that basically is not easily available within the web. Let's say what's available to web browser. You have some sort of a solution that does not necessarily support that out of the box, or you may need some coding basically to make it easy for your Bubble application to talk to your container, basically a web wrapper. So this is where you might sweat a little, and you might need to kind of do some heavy lifting, while in the case of solution like Air Native, it's kind of something that we have already thought for, and we've made that easily available and accessible in a form of a plugin with the workflows, which is easily understandable for people in the Bubble world. And it's basically a plug and play kind of thing, which will make it way easier for you to test new things and launch new things within your existing build without having to code your way out of it, which is also always a way. And that's one of the great advantages of Bubble, but maybe not the easiest one. So definitely something to consider. So I guess we have time for one more question, and we're going to wrap it up real quick. So what's going to be the question?
I can answer one thing just while you're looking for a question here, because sure. I think there's a very common misunderstanding that I want to look into here. Sure. It's I can understand that it's confusing. A lot of people are asking about the setting on a Bubble page that says this page is a native app.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And a lot of people assume that if this one is checked, this one will show up in your application if you use something like your solution to bring it into the App Store. And you know what people should be aware of is this setting doesn't really do anything. It just gives you a few tips on how to build mobile apps. That's really all it does. And I think it's actually kind of an ancient relic, this checkbox here. I don't think Bubble had looked at it for quite a while.
Yeah, I think forgot about it.
Yeah, I think they did. It shows some of their earlier ambitions, and then it really didn't go anywhere for a few years. And the checkbox is still there and has been confusing people for years now, myself included. So I just wanted to answer that real quickly.
That's a good point. I think in the beginning, Bubble actually had a procedure for putting your apps and wrapping them. There was like a separate application on an app store that was developed by Bubble team, and then you had to click on this page's native app thing, and then it kind of worked. Well, it didn't actually, but it looked like it worked. But then Bubble understood that creating native applications is something that's way more complicated and maybe not that important for their current priorities. And this is kind of where they left it. I think eventually Bubble will probably come to the point when they will build something as part of their core solution, or maybe integrate something very good that's going to be available by then, because that's definitely an important and a very needed and valued feature, but we're not there just yet. So there's a lot of interim solutions which are definitely addressing the need until then.
Yeah.
Okay. The question that I think we're going to wrap it with today is there's a lot of good ones. It's hard to pick. Okay, I'm guessing let's pick a technical one. There's a question: can a Bubble application access to the camera, photos, contact, send, email, launch apps, post to Facebook, Google Map directions? And can a Bubble application access JavaScript libraries such as React Native background geolocation? So simple way to answer that is yes, it can. There are some, let's say, some caveats here. Basically, it won't be able to do that just out of the box on its own. It will require some of the overhead code, let's say. The name for that, there's a lot of different names for that, but basically what it acts like is a bridge. Basically, the Bubble application requires a bridge software that would both listen to the commands that are being issued by Bubble web application and being sent towards the code that the native part of your phone operational system understands, and vice versa. So when the phone sends some information, there is a need for a translation to the thing that Bubble will understand and kind of act upon. Basically, there's something that is required to marry workflows and Bubble database and things to your generic smartphone operational system SDK. And that is a bridge. You can develop it yourself. It's called a JavaScript bridge. So it's pretty, there's a lot of examples out there, but eventually this is kind of what native wrapper is all about. So this is the thing that not only contains your application and makes it publishable, but also makes it easy for your web application to talk to your phone and vice versa. So this is basically the longer way to answer it. It doesn't cover all the cases, and maybe some of them are going to be easier or more complex than the others, but essentially that's what it's all about, and this is why people are wanting that in the first place. So yeah, that's probably all we have time for with the questions. Last question, not about the native apps, but about Peter's books. So Peter, when is the book for the security coming out? People are anxious about it and they're asking us for the dates. What do you think?
Well, I appreciate the question, of course. I would love to know the answer to that question. It had a release date in mid-January, and we're close to mid-February, so obviously I missed the mark. The problem with this one is that I'm writing about security, as you know, and I really don't want to get anything wrong, right? I really want this book to be at launch correct in everything that it says. And so what I've done is that I've reached out to some key people who can help verify the information before I publish it, because I don't want to see any of my mistakes branch out into hundreds of apps out there and set up unsafe environments because of me. It's harder to predict how long they're going to take, because they're basically doing this out of the kindness of their hearts, and they're getting back to me at their own schedule. So yeah, I'm not going to set a deadline because I may miss it. So, but soon, within weeks, is my I'm hoping.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a very deep topic. I don't know if you had a chance, but we spoke actually with Benoit a few weeks back, actually,
Yeah.
about the same topic, and it's very deep, and I fully understand why you think it's best to kind of invest a little more effort and a little more verification to whatever is going to go out in there, because it is very deep. So for people who don't have patience to wait a couple of weeks for Peter's book about security, check out our recent recording with Benoit, where we also dive deep into some of the topics, definitely not all of them, but just to give an example of how interesting, let's say, this topic can be. So definitely I'm waiting for the book, Peter. Let us know where people should go looking for whenever it's going to be announced, where people can talk to you and nag you about the dates, or anything else about what we spoke about today, maybe.
Yeah, so everyone who bought the first book will receive an email unless you unsubscribe from the list. So I'll be posting it there, and obviously on the Bubble forum and on Twitter. I'm gonna be public when I release it. I'm not gonna keep it secret.
Definitely, please don't. We all are very, very, very curious to see. So yeah, all right. I think that's a wrap for today. Definitely, there's a lot more to talk about for native and some intricacies, and then there's a lot more things to talk about Air Native and the process, and then let's say the pros and cons. I guess that the biggest takeaway that I had from talking to Peter today is that it's a very interesting topic. There are some principles to keep in mind. Less is more, plan it better, and figure out the rest for yourselves. There are some solutions out there like Air Native, which are trying to make it easier for you guys. Whether it's applicable for your particular case, probably yes, but do give it a shot. Check it out. Talk to us. Reach out to Peter on his Twitter, I guess. And hopefully some of the answers that we have been talking about today are going to be useful for people planning their deployment, their native application, and the plan to conquer Google Play Store and Apple App Store. So Peter, thank you very much. It's always great to have you. I hope we helped your jet lag a little bit, and we are hoping to see you again very soon. We seem to be always have we seem to never run out of topics to talk to Peter, so definitely we're going to talk to him again. I hope if we've it's not going to be bored of us. So thank you, everyone. Peter, thank you very much, and talk to you all soon.
Thank you, Vlad. All right, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.